Welcome back. So we've talked about the first three components, the first three steps in this 5-step problem-solving approach. Understand the problem, then go through some concrete examples. Talk about edge cases, inputs, outputs, that sort of thing. Next, break down your approach, your solution into a couple of steps that you can follow. It doesn't have to be insanely detailed, but it does help if you can come up with pretty thorough steps. And then sometimes, if all of that went well and you feel good about it, you can just solve and you write your code right away. And I should note that's not the last step. Even if you do solve it, there's still a step after this. But sometimes you're not ready to solve the entire problem at this point. You might feel good about 80%, but then there's this one thing you're not sure how to do. Or there's, two things that are really challenging. So that's where simplify comes in. Solve or simplify, or solve/simplify. Okay, designated slide. So solve the problem if you can. And if you can't, solve a simpler problem. Now, that doesn't mean changing the subject entirely and picking, let's solve 1 + 1. That's stupid. I don't know why I said that. What it really means is trying to ignore the part that is giving you a really hard time in order to focus on everything else. So why is it even worth doing this? Well, first of all, in an interview setting, often you want to have something to show for yourself. So instead of getting stuck on one difficult part of a problem and making zero progress at all because you're putting all of your eggs in one basket of being able to solve it 100% before you even start writing code, that often can look bad. It's much better, even if you know there's some part that you're going to get stuck on, it's much better to just start writing code to do the stuff you know how to do, all the while keeping in mind that you do need to incorporate that harder part back in. Secondly, it's pretty common that in simplifying a problem, you'll gain insight into the actual solution, into the harder part of the problem, and something will click into place. So I really, really recommend that if you do get stuck on something, but you know where to start, or you know a place to start, you should just go for it. Once, of course, you've done the first 3 steps. You've understood the problem, you've done concrete examples, and you've broken it down into steps. So as far as the simplification, I like to think about it this way. So you find the core difficulty in what you're trying to do, the thing that is tripping you up, that you're panicking about. Temporarily ignore that difficulty, write a simplified solution, and then incorporate that difficulty back in if you can. And along the way, often at this step, you'll gain insight into how this part works. So one more time, let's return to this example. Write a function which takes in a string and returns counts of each character in the string. All right, so char count, remember, should return an object that contains all the a count for every alphanumeric character in an input string. So ignoring every non-letter or number, and all the letters should be lowercase. So there's a couple things that could present difficulties here. To start off with the really simple, obvious ones, if someone has trouble with looping, then this could be problematic. And if you did have trouble with looping, then I would, if it were me and I struggled with looping, I would start by creating an object and just working with the first character in that string, or hard coding in the first 5 characters. Probably, not going to get me a job, but at least it's a start. And then once you figure out, how to handle it for one character, the very first item in a string, like right here, you lowercase it, or you add it to the object, or you check if it's in the object, and then you do it for the second character, then the third character, then you find a pattern that you can turn into a loop. Another thing that could be problematic is someone might not be comfortable working with keys and values in objects. Again, a very simple problem, and you're probably not going to be interviewing for a job if you have trouble doing that. But if you were trying to solve a problem anyway, maybe you're at home, and you don't feel good about using keys and values and manipulating objects, you could start with a loop and loop over every character in the string and maybe just print out that character. Or probably a more realistic thing is that you may not be comfortable working with uppercase and lowercase strings. Or if you're in an interview setting, you might not remember. Sometimes, you don't have access to a computer if you're on a whiteboard. You might not remember the exact method that lowercases or uppercases a string in JavaScript. So I would just ignore that. I would just start with the main logic and then, put uppercase and lowercase characters in there and just deal with it later and just say out loud, like, I can't remember exactly how to do this, so I'm just going to skip that part. And then at the end, I'll go back, or if I had my computer, I would just quickly Google how to lowercase something in JavaScript and I'd lowercase everything at the beginning. Something like that. Now, if I did actually face this in an interview, which to be fair, it's a pretty easy problem, at least on the surface, the thing that would probably trip me up the most and trip up most students that I've worked with is making sure a character is alphanumeric. Making this object to return at the end, simple enough. We could just call it like frequency or count result maybe. It's an empty object. Loop over the string for each character. So I'll just do for var I equals 0. I is less than string.length. All right, then this gives me each character. And we could start off by just adding each character into that object or checking if it's in that object. So ignore the number letter part, ignore alphanumeric, ignore the casing even, and just check if that exact character is in the object. So I would just do something like if result of, let's make a variable here to make this a little more legible. So let's make a variable called char equals string of I, instead of having to put string of I all over the place. So if result of char is greater than 0, meaning it's already in there, then I'm going to just copy this and do plus plus. Else, we're going to set result of char equal to 1, because that means it's not in there yet. And this is basically where I would start, assuming I don't have a typo. So if we put my pseudocode, let's move this here. If the character, we haven't conquered this number letter problem, but we're at least getting 90% of the way there. Just put my little bits of pseudocode here. And we're not tackling this. Return the object at the end. So then return result. And let's see if it works. Okay, I ran my solution. And if I run char count, is this large enough? Char count of hello. Let's make this a bit larger. It works. You can see that we get H1, E1, L2, O1. If I instead do hi there, like this, you can see we're also getting uppercase H. We're getting, what else? Exclamation point. We're getting space. So that's not ideal, but we're really close. So now, if we have this done, we could at least figure out the lowercase part, or, maybe our interviewer gives us a hint, or we have access to figure out how to do the lowercase. It's just a method to lowercase, or we could uppercase everything. But it's a matter of if we want to lowercase the entire string first, or we could do it, one character at a time. So we could come in here and just do 2 lowercase like that, rerun our code, and now if we look at char count of hi there, it all works. We have 2 H, E is 2, casing doesn't matter. Now we still have the non-alphanumeric characters, but this gets us most of the way there. And now we could do some additional research. We could ask our interviewer if they had suggestions. We could just start spitballing on how to do that alphanumeric component. So to tell if a number or if a character is alphanumeric, there's a couple options. We could define an array essentially containing every valid character, which would be really annoying. So we could have an array that was massive, that had A, B, C, D, uppercase and lowercase, and every alphanumeric character, which I guess is not that many, but still, it would be a long array. We could use a regular expression, which is probably what I would do, and I'll show you a solution with that in the next video. You could also probably do something with the character codes, the ASCII codes. There's a lot of different ways you could do it. And all that we would need to do is plug it in to our existing code. So if we were checking if it was a valid character, I would maybe just add an additional if statement and nest these inside of that if statement. So all of this logic stays. We wouldn't be deleting anything. We're just adding in that one little component. So to wrap this up, this isn't a particularly challenging question in all honesty, but there's still a lot of different approaches that we could take, a lot of different ways of solving it. And like I said, the next solution I'll show you in the next video, as well as a couple refactored versions, vary quite a bit. But at the end of the day, we write what we can, right? We loop, we add things into the object, we have a couple conditionals. Even if it's not perfect, we're still 90-something% of the way there. We just need a way to check if something is alphanumeric. And in an interview, if you can get 90% of the way there and you just have this one little thing that you need to complete, you tell the interviewer, there's 3 different ways. I'm not sure which one's best, or I'm not sure how to do this. Do you have any suggestions on what I could do to check if something is alphanumeric? That sort of line of questioning, if you get 90% of the way there, it demonstrates a lot about your problem-solving ability rather than just fixating on that before you even begin. So it's much better to write something, not just like rashly put stuff on the page and hope it works, but get the right pieces in place so that once you figure out the hard part, you can just plug it in.